So tonight's address is the F word, and our guest is Jane Gilmore. And Jane is a feminist and a journalist, and she started her Fixed It project, so it's hashtag Fixed It, in 2013 to hold the media to account in their portrayal of victims of rape and child abuse. For tonight's event, Jane will evaluate the Australian media and how they have performed in 2017 in their depiction of women, whether it's in politics, the arts, sport, or in the reporting of domestic violence. And today, thanks to social media, audiences have increasing power to force change in the way the news is presented. But are public perceptions still being shaped by such reporting? And how can a simple correction, a better image, another choice of words, or laying blame where it belongs make a difference? Part feminist stocktake, part personal reflection, Jane Gilmore will tonight tackle the year that was as she examines how the media was chosen to represent or misrepresent women in 2017. Please make Jane feel very welcome.
Hello, thank you. Thank you, Santilla. Now, before I start, I just want to tell everybody that I'm sure that most of you will know, but some of the content that I'm going to be talking about is dealing with things like rape and domestic violence. Some of it is very graphic. Obviously, if you want to leave, please do. Don't hesitate. But I know that in the middle of a crowd like this, sometimes that can be a bit much. There's going to be a lot of people live tweeting, so if you just want to pull out your phone and stare at your phone, tune out for a bit and think about something else, please do. Anything you need to do to keep yourself safe. So, as Santilla said, I'm a journalist. I read some research a couple of weeks back about how Australians value journalists. And it is one of the least valued professions in Australia. We come just above politicians and priests. And I think that's fair. We earned it. And we earned it in the same way that politicians and priests did. We forgot about the purpose of our profession. It's one of my favourite things. Margaret Simons told me this years ago. Apparently it's from our code of ethics that says that the purpose of journalism is to describe society to itself. And Margaret said to me, we do this by finding things out and telling people about them. Sounds really simple, right? What could be more simple than that? Unfortunately, it's not that simple. And it's a problem because when we're describing society to itself, when we're describing things that aren't happening, that's where we lose our credibility. Because despite what a lot of journalists think, the audiences aren't stupid. And you know when you see something and you say, that's not the society I live in, that's not true, I don't recognise that. And so you lose faith in us, as you should. Again, it's why we all lost faith in politicians and priests. This is from the Mates Over Merit report. It was done by Women in Media, part of the Media and Entertainment Alliance. And the bottom here, what you've got is a description of what's the makeup of the media industry. So somewhere around 70% of journalists are men. But that's not evenly spread across. That's not evenly spread across the whole of journalism. It's concentrated in particular areas. So there's news and there's women's news. News is politics and sport, finance, proper men things. Women's news is celebrities and gossips, cupcakes, recipes, social issues. That's where you find the female journalists. So what you see here, the 30% across the board. In sport, 90%. The other thing that came up in the Mates Over Merit report is that one up the top there, 48%. This was of a survey of over 1,000 journalists, female journalists in Australia. 48% said that they had experienced sexual harassment, intimidation or bullying in the workplace. Now, to put that in context, when Elizabeth Broderick got into the ADF, women in the Defence Forces, 25% of them reported sexual harassment. When the Victorian Human Rights Commission put VicPol, Victoria Police, under the microscope, it was 40%. And you want to think those two things made headlines? All over the world, they hit the newspapers with a bang. This sank like a stone. Nobody talked about it. Nobody in the media talked about it anyway. Because as much as we don't want to look in our own backyard, we certainly don't want you looking in our backyard. But what happens when you have a male-dominated, toxic environment reporting on crime? Because what we're telling you with crime, what we're describing to you is how safe are you? How safe are you in your community? How safe are your friends? How safe are your children? How safe are your parents? How are the people in your community abiding by the laws set up to protect you? If they're not abiding by those laws, who, what, when, how, why, and to whom? That's what you need to know. So you take a male-dominated, toxic environment and ask them to report on men's violence against women. What do you get? Nothing good. I've been asked many, many times, what's the worst headline I've ever fixed? And my answer is always the same, all of them. Because all of them are about a person. Every single one of those headlines is about the worst thing that ever happened to somebody. But there are a few that stand out, and they stand out because they encapsulate everything that is wrong with these headlines. This one, she's a doctor's daughter. She's not a person. She only exists in relation to her relationship with a man and his status. He's a doctor, she's his daughter, so she has some value. But she was drunk. She necked 6 jail bombs. And we know that before we know what happened to her. And even in the subheading, it's about her friends. Why didn't they look after her? In all of this, the man who found her on the street and took her home and raped her and beat her to death doesn't make an appearance. He's completely invisible. Tracey Connolly. She lived 5 minutes around the corner from me. We both lived in St Kilda for a long time. She was standing on the stage next to me right now. There'd be a lot of similarities. She was the same age as me, she had the same colouring as me, we lived in the same area. And when the people who loved her talk to me about her, they talk about a woman who was fierce and vulnerable and strong and flawed and had a huge laugh and no patience for bullshit. She was suspicious of strangers because she had reason to be. They talk about a woman, a person that they knew. And Tracey was murdered, which is the ultimate violation, viciously, in her home. And after that violation, she was denied her very humanity by my profession. Because these headlines, they were in every single publication in the country. It was in the Daily Telegraph and the Courier Mail and the Adelaide Advertiser. It was in Western Australia and Northern Territory and Tasmania. It was everywhere. She's a prostitute. She's not a person. She's a St Kilda prostitute, so you know exactly what kind of prostitute she is. And what these things are telling you, they are not telling you about the woman that I was just talking to you about. But they are describing something. They're describing to you what women are in the media, what we are in the headlines. We are good women or bad women. We are, as Anne Summers wrote 40 years ago, we are damned whores or we are God's police. But there's nothing in the middle. Tracey was a prostitute, so she's a bad woman. If you're a good woman, you're nice and you're sweet and you're calm and you're conservatively dressed and you don't criticise men and you don't laugh too loud or talk too much or be too difficult. If you're a bad woman, if you actually have sexual desires rather than being the object of them, if you have opinions, if you dance too much and yell and go out and have fun, you're a party girl, you're an it girl, but you're not a nice girl. And good women, they don't let things happen to them. They don't get themselves into trouble. Bad women, they go out asking for it. And look at what happens to them. How many times have you seen a variation on this headline? Because I'm betting it's a lot. These are just the last few months. Now, if I was to meet a man on Tinder and it was to end in violence, I can absolutely guarantee you that the first word in the headline about that is going to be Tinder. If I met him in a bookshop, in a church group, I wouldn't meet him in a church group. If I met him walking my dog, not only would those things not make it into the headline, they wouldn't even make it into the article. They're not relevant. But if I met him on Tinder, I'm a woman that actually wants to have sex, out there actively pursuing it, not just sitting back passively waiting for a man to come to me. What did I think was going to happen to me? I will be punished for that, see? It's going to end in sexual assault. And it will be my fault, because I'm a bad woman. I'm guessing some of you have probably seen Jackson Katz's TED Talk on violence against women. It's a men's issue. If you haven't, I highly recommend that you do. Just Google Jackson Katz's TED Talk. It'll be the first thing that comes up. Obviously, I'm not going to go through all of it, but there's one bit in the middle that he does on basic sentence structure that underpins everything I do on Fixed It. So I think it's worth going through. 4 basic sentences. John raped Mary. Good, strong, active English sentence. Subject, verb, object. Tells you exactly what happened. Same sentence in the passive voice, but everything's still there. Mary was raped by John. Third sentence, still tells you what happened. Mary was raped. Yes, she was. Mary is a rape victim. Now, of those 4 sentences, which one accurately describes what happened? The bottom one, Mary is a rape victim? Well, it's not that, because no, she isn't. She's Mary. She was raped, but she is not a rape victim. People who are raped do not become the thing that was done to them. They are the person, and they keep being that person after that happened to them. So that bottom one's out. Mary was raped. Yes, she was. But by who? How? Because without John in that sentence, all we look at it and say Mary was raped, and the automatic question is why? What did she do? The next one up. Mary was raped by John. Everything is there, but it's in the passive voice, and Mary is at the beginning of the sentence. She's the subject. So we're still focusing on her. What did she do? How did she get there? How did this happen to her? Why did it happen to her? But that first sentence, John raped Mary. John is the subject of the sentence, as he should be. This happened because of his choices. He decided to do this. He is the subject of the sentence. He decided to commit rape, and he raped Mary. Perfect sentence, 3 words, describes exactly what happened. And that is the one that you will never ever see in the headlines. Those bottom 2, variations of, that's everything you see. Now, we are taught in Journalism 101, stick to the active voice. And journalists do, except when they're talking about violence against women. 2 weeks ago in Queensland, a man held a woman in a house for 3 days. When the police got there, they took her to hospital. They arrested him and they charged him with multiple counts, several counts of rape, assault, torture. These were the 2 articles about it. So this one from the Cairns Post. Cairns Child Protection and Investigation Unit raid house. Now, I'm not even sure what that is. Are they police or are they a group of militant kindergarten teachers? And why did they raid a house? What did the house do? You can't even tell from that what happened. You don't know that there's violence. You don't know that there was a victim. You don't know there was a perpetrator. You don't know anything, really, other than there's some obscurely named police unit in Cairns. The Townsville Bulletin, who make regular appearances in Fixed It. Cairns woman treated for injuries after being held against will for 3 days. Okay, well, we know there was a woman involved and she was injured. She's held against her will. What, did she get stuck in a chair? Both of these sentences. Where is the perpetrator? He's completely invisible. He's not there at all. I mean, nothing's there in this one. It's completely ridiculous. But even in this one, he's not there. Now, that bottom one in the Australian, I just put that in just to make the comment that it doesn't matter about the gender of the victim. In this case here, a 58-year-old man was charged by police for allegedly breaking into this man, elderly man in his 80s, breaking into his house and sexually assaulting him twice. And he's not there in the headline. Why? When the men do appear in headlines, what we get is this. So the man's there, Sydney man, accused of vehicle assault. He did not assault a car. This man, sentenced to lay over house sex assault. He did not sexually assault a house. It was a woman, it was a 54-year-old woman. But this again is the things that happen. Violence is there, crimes are there, perpetrators are not, the victims not. We don't have the John raped Mary sentence anywhere in these. Aaron James couldn't watch the grand final. He had to go to prison. That's so sad for him. 130 charges. 130 charges, most of them domestic violence related, where he was assaulting his wife in front of his children. But what's the most important thing for you to know? He had to go to prison and couldn't go to the grand final. Poor Aaron. This one, weekend away nightmare, ends up in court case. Sounds like what, a tree fell on their tent and they're suing the trailer park? Somebody fell down the stairs and they're suing the B&B? He punched his wife in the face twice and threw her into a road. What is this headline? This one here, the standard, Mary was raped. Woman beaten, choked and stabbed. By what? By who? What did she do? No perpetrator in that. And this one is where we move into the next thing that always happens quite frequently, excuses for men. So the boyfriend's there, and he can actually be named, but he wasn't in the headline. Slams woman onto concrete after affair. He smashed her head into a wall, punched her, knocked her unconscious. And he didn't do it because of an affair, he did it because he chose to be violent. But this, over and over again. He's horny, he's lovesick. His wife left him, he needed some comfort. Now, I can see most of you, and without trying to get personal here, I'm pretty sure most of you at some point or another have been horny, heartbroken, in need of comfort. Maybe you've even had someone cheat on you. It feels bad. How many of you have thought, hey, I might go and rape somebody now. That'll make me feel better because I've got an excuse. That would be ludicrous. Nobody would think that. But here they are. Now, despite my frustration with this, I don't actually think that newsroom directors are at home stroking white cats and plotting out how to hide men's violence against women. I don't think it's deliberate. I don't even think they know they're doing it. I think what it is these male-dominated newsrooms, and it's like a cry from the heart from every newsroom in the country going, not all men. Because if every headline that we ever saw about men's violence against women was in the John raped Mary format, it would be overwhelming. It would be not just day after day, it would be hour after hour after hour of man did this, man did this, man did this, because the sad truth is that 90% of violent crimes are committed by men. Now, I'm not just an unapologetic feminist, I'm a stridently proud feminist. Apparently, what this is supposed to mean is that I am supposed to hate men. I am supposed to believe that all men are rapists and they should all be put to death. This is what I'm told. And I find this confusing because to me, feminism says, no, of course not all men, because men are not born like this. Men are not born to be violent. Men are not born thinking that women are objects that they're entitled to. Men are not born thinking the only emotions they're allowed to feel is anger and lust. Men are not born believing that frustration entitles them to violence. They're taught these things. And they shouldn't be. They don't have to be. But they're taught this over and over again in so many different ways. And this is one of the ways. And I think it has to stop. So let's move on to some other things. When the Prime Minister of England and the First Minister of Scotland meet to talk about Britain's exit from the EU, what do you think is the most important thing for one of the most read newspapers in England to tell the good citizens of England about? Now, I understand that geopolitical, legal, financial ramifications of Brexit might be a little outside the Daily Mail skill set. But seriously? The leaders of each country are reduced to body parts and compared to how hot they are? That's what we get? Hillary Clinton has 1 child and 1 grandchild. And it was a rash of articles debating whether or not she was fit to be president because she should be home looking after her grandchild. Mitt Romney had 18 grandchildren when he was running for president. 18! I could not find a single article that said, oh, well, I don't think he should be president because he's got grandkids and he should be home looking after them. He's not a proper man. Okay, one of these headlines actually appeared in The Sun. The other one I wrote myself and photoshopped in. Can you pick which one's the real one? Now, I'm guessing most of you know that it's the Judi Dench one, and probably because you saw it. And the reason that you saw it was it made headlines around the world. It wasn't just the UK and Australia. It was the US, Canada, New Zealand. It went into Zimbabwe. Judi Dench likes sex, apparently. Shock. I counted at least 60 comment pieces following it up. Now, Judi Dench is one of the most beautiful and talented women in the world. Why is it so shocking that she likes sex? Well, the obvious answer is right there in the headline. She's 82. She's supposed to be home looking after grandchildren. She's not supposed to be out being a person, being a woman, actively in charge of her own sexual desires. So, of course, it makes headlines. This one, and I did warn you there would be some disturbing content. This one would never appear, not only because these headlines usually only appear in the Murdoch press and they wouldn't dare, but this one would never appear because a man in his 80s who still wants to have sex. That's not news. That's what we expect. Men are supposed to always be desiring sex, wanting it, chasing it, lusting after it. There is a multi-billion-dollar industry built around men in their 80s still being able to have sex. So it's not news. But Judi Dench, that's news. Because women, again, we're allowed to be one of 2 things. I was wrong in the beginning with the good or bad. We can be good, we can be bad, or we can be invisible. As I said earlier, I live in St Kilda, so I catch the tram in here. It takes me about half an hour or so. And I've counted on that tram ride, that's without looking at my phone, just sitting on the tram looking out the window, how many images, sexualised, young, white, slim, pretty women do I see on that tram? I get to about 70, and that's not counting going through the CBD and the shop windows. That's just billboards, tram stops, buses along the station. 70. How many women do you know who look like this? I can tell you the answer to that is none, because these women don't look like this. I was showing these to a friend of mine when I was preparing for this, and he pointed out this one, the Sports Illustrated, the 3 girls. And he said to me, well, that's not bad, is it? I mean, it's sexualising them, but it's not horrible like that one. It's not the now open thing. That's disgusting, he said. This one, the beautiful young bodies, they're just being used to sell something. That's what advertising's all about. He said they use beautiful young male bodies to sell things too. And he's right, they do. Difference is, picture that one with the male equivalent. Beautiful young male bodies with their arms around each other, touching. Where do you see that? Gay press, right? Because images are for men. And we don't want to frighten men with gay stuff. Ooh, that's not a real man. These women, these are the women you don't see. Aboriginal women, old women, women with disabilities, women who are not a size 8, lesbian women, trans women, all the things that old white man media says women are not allowed to be. So if you are those women, off you go. There's being misrepresented in the media, and then there's just not being represented at all. being completely erased from public consciousness. Do you know how hard it was to find these images? How easy it was to find the ones on the previous slide? These are the women we never see. But I bet these women look a lot more familiar to you than the other ones did. Something else you never see. Men being held to account for other men's violence. There's a sexual predator on the loose. Men, stay home, because then we know the only men that are out are the dangerous ones and we can arrest them. Men, if you think you're going to rape somebody, when you go out, wear a rape whistle. If you feel like you're about to rape somebody, blow it really hard and hope a man comes along and stops you. No. If women are in danger, it's their responsibility. Stay home, don't go out. Despite the fact that the most dangerous place for a woman to be is at home with her male partner on a Saturday night. It's not out in the streets. At home is where she is most likely to be raped and murdered. Now, I know it might not look like it, but I'm about to end on a positive note. This top one was from April this year. And it was a moment where, with the Fixed It project, I was getting so angry with headline after headline after headline that included the words child sex. Sexual relationships. This boy in this headline was 15 years old. He did not have a sexual relationship with a man in his 60s. He's a child. He can't have sex with an adult. He can't consent to it. But it was coming up over and over again. I have Google alerts. This is how I spend a couple of hours every morning, believe it or not. And so I started a concerted campaign. Every time I see these headlines, I'm going to fix them and put them back out again. And I wrote 600 or 700 words, and every time, red pen, copy paste, red pen, copy paste. It was going day after day after day after day. 6 months ago, those Google alerts were coming up 6 or 7 a day. Last week, I didn't get any. Now, obviously, that's not just me, because editors are not just going to listen to one annoying feminist. But what was happening was other people were picking it up. What was happening was it was being shared. It was other people were just doing it themselves. Other people were pulling out their red pens. And last week, this headline. Now, it doesn't name him, because often with child victims you can't, because you can't identify the victims. But there he is at the front of the sentence, elderly man. He's jailed, so we know he did the wrong thing. It's 3 decades, so we know it was ongoing, and it's sexual abuse. It's correctly identified, and it's against young girls. It's the John Rape Mary sentence. Now, this was not just me, by any means. This image over here, when the Canberra Times put this headline up, Lauren Ingram was one of the people, of many people, who protested on Twitter. It took an hour for them to change it. See, the thing that we've been talking about in journalism for a long time is that the rivers of gold dried up years ago. And we need the audiences far more than you need us. You can get your news from a whole lot of different places. We've only got one option with the audience, is you. So when you push back, when you do things like what Lauren did, publicly, and say, hey, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? We can see you doing that, and it's wrong. Don't do it. If you do it, I'm going to go somewhere else. Now, I don't know if the Canberra Times is going to do something like this again. It's possible. But I can guarantee when they do, somebody's going to smack them for it, and eventually they'll stop. This thing with the child sex, it'll probably start to come back again. And when it does, a whole lot of people are going to jump on them. And eventually things change. And you don't even have to be an annoying feminist to do it. Although I think you should be, because it's pretty great. And I think that's probably the perfect note to end on. Thank you so much for listening.
That was a great lecture.
Thank you.
Before I get into some of the things that you highlighted, I'm curious to know, just out of interest, when you came to feminism, or if you've always been a feminist?
No, I haven't always been a feminist, and you can't find this online, by the way, I've made sure. But in the early days of the Tribune, I actually wrote a Not All Men article myself. It would have been 10 years ago or so. It took me a long time to come to it, which kind of ashamed of now, but it's the truth. I think it was when I started getting involved in journalism and started learning more and reading more and writing more and just noticing more. And the more you see, the more you keep seeing, and you can't unsee what you've seen. So it's been a long journey, an ongoing journey. There's still more things I need to learn, but yeah, taken about 10 years.
So since you started Fixed It, you talked about some of the gains that have been made, albeit slowly. What else has manifested as a result of that? You know, how aware are people within the media of such headlines?
It always looks like they're not aware, that I never get a response to the Fixed It things. But every now and again, when I do see the perfect John raped Mary headline, I will put that up and say, no fix required. Look at this. This is how journalism can work. And suddenly they all come out of the woodwork. Suddenly all the journalists and editors are liking and sharing and retweeting, and they love it. So I figure they're seeing it.
Yeah. You talked about how you don't think that most of the journalists that are writing these articles are aware of what they're doing. And I almost wonder, how do we get to a point where we start to interrogate that sort of, I suppose, unconscious bias that's going on when these stories are being written?
That's a really difficult problem, because it's trained into the baby journos as they go through the system that this is how you write these headlines. So it's constantly perpetuated by the older journalists, indoctrinated into the newer ones, and so it just goes on and on. But I do think that social media has made a difference, that journalism is not a one-to-many, one-way communication anymore. It's a two-way communication, and audiences can come back, and they do. And like I said, they need the audience far more than the audience needs them, so they have to respond.
Do you also think that part of the reason why that's not interrogated enough is simply because of the patriarchy? I mean, if people have these ideas about what they think women are like, then they would naturally, unconsciously sort of bring this to their work.
I think
it might reflect broader society.
It's a real problem. It's one of the things that comes up a lot with this, that I'm guessing most of the people here, you probably read news today, but how many of you would have actually read a print newspaper cover to cover? Not many. A couple, maybe one or two. If you are, congratulations, you're an aberration. Most of us get our news online, and the way I do it is probably the way you do it. You scan down your Facebook feed, or even if you go onto The Age or The Guardian, or maybe even the Herald-Sun, who knows, and you scan down all the headlines and you go, nope, 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 not interested, not relevant. Oh, what's that? Hell no, I'm not reading that. And that's certainly the way I do it. I think it's the way most people do it. And then what happens is that the headlines that you go, no, not reading that, you don't notice them. They don't go in, you don't think about them, but you read them. And so they slosh around in the back of your mind, and it's the things that we don't notice that are really dangerous. The things we do notice are not dangerous because we've noticed them and we've seen them and we've objected to them. It's the things that don't register, but they go in there and they sit there and they're reinforced by everything that we see of perpetuating these myths about women. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the most powerful thing about Fixed It, is saying, hey, notice this. Because this is the thing that I get all the time of, oh, I hadn't noticed that until you pointed it out, and now I see it all the time. And then I see other people picking up the Fixed It thing, which I think is great.
Do you think one of the ways that perhaps could help shift this would be, I'm sort of thinking about training within media organisations where you or someone else goes in and actually talks about these sorts of things to bring that level of awareness? Do you think news organisations are ready for that kind of shift?
Some of them are. You can see it in some of the changes that have happened. Margaret Simons and Jenny, I've forgotten her name, sorry Jenny, did a study on this a while ago. So Ellen Winnett at the Herald-Sun did that really, really strong push a year or two back on the way they were reporting family violence. And they suddenly got really good. They were doing some great work, the headlines were great, the stories were great, it was really going into the complex issues. It wasn't just, oh, he hits her, it was describing the wide, complex nature of domestic violence, and it was all happening because of Ellen. And then when Ellen left, it all kind of just dribbled away again. So it was about one particular person. To get broad-based cultural change is a very big thing, and it's going to take a long time. Yeah.
One of the stats that you brought up at the start of the presentation was to do with sexual assault in the workplace, and I think the figure that you pulled up was 48%, which was unsurprising. But yet, I was sitting there going, gosh, especially when you brought it up, that it was pretty much missed by most news organisations. And just thinking about what's currently going on in the landscape with the Me Too and women coming forward, I suppose, do you think that in particular, the Me Too campaign is perhaps creating a shift in how we talk about sexual assault and how women are perhaps reported on in the media when they bring up these stories?
I would really like to believe that's true, but we've seen this before, the everyday sexism thing a few years back. We've seen these things come up before, maybe not quite in this way. I would really like to believe that it's true, but I don't know if I'm able to be that optimistic anymore. I think I'd like to see it first. I know Tracey Spicer is organising women in media to come forward and talk about the men that have harassed them and assaulted them, and I would imagine there's a fair few men in Australian media sitting at home shivering and talking to their lawyers quite a lot these days. Good. But I don't know if there's going to be any real change while old white men dominate the media. I mean, it's not just that all these old white men are evil, it's that there's only one perspective. That what I was saying about all those women who are just invisible, there's misrepresentation and then there's no representation. That without those other perspectives in there, you've got nobody to say, hang on, what are we doing with that headline? You need those other perspectives in there, and at the moment, there's very few of them there. One of the things that I do think is interesting is that the Age, which did come up with Tracey, that was quite a few years ago, as far as I can remember, I think that, and maybe one other, is the only time that the Age has ever been and fixed it, and that is not because I don't look at them, because this just comes up on Google search terms. The Age is also, as far as I know, the only media outlet where the news director is a woman.
Right.
I suspect the two are related.
But do you think, though, that, when I think about the Me Too campaign and seeing how many men, powerful men, are losing their jobs, are losing their positions of influence...
But are they? I mean, Harvey Weinstein did and Kevin Spacey did, but of the thousands and thousands of women that came out on that Me Too, how many men have actually lost their jobs? Harvey Weinstein. There were hundreds of thousands of women in Me Too. So, like I said, I think it was a powerful campaign, and I think it was really powerful for women to join together on that. And I think it was powerful for men to see, my God, this is what it's like for women in the world, just this constant coming at you. I think it was really good for men to see that. But I haven't seen any men losing their jobs. So I'm not convinced yet. I would like to be. I would really like to be.
Yeah. So where do you think we go from here? I mean, you've got women still coming forward to this day, sharing their stories very bravely. And in many cases, as you highlight, it seems like there are no consequences for men. What then happens? I mean, if there are other women that are seeing that kind of going, well, nothing's really happening even if I come forward, what is it going to take?
I think change takes a really long time. And we're so used to things happening quickly, and it's so frustrating when you can see so clearly what needs to change and realise that it's going to take decades. That if you take the long view, if you look back over the last 200 years of what's changed, that it's not like we've got to where things stop now. It's still changing. That 200 years ago we couldn't vote, we couldn't own property. It was legal, in my lifetime, it was legal to rape your wife. In my lifetime, women had to, just before I was born, you could fire a married woman. When she got married, no, that's it, you're not allowed to work anymore. Go home, look after your husband. I mean, you imagine somebody trying to say that to me right now? So things have changed an awful lot in my lifetime, and in the long view, I think that change will keep happening. So I do believe that eventually we'll get there, but it's not going to happen this year or next year, and it only happens if we don't stop pushing it, because this is not just going to be offered to us. It's not going to happen. We have to keep pushing.
At this stage, I'd like to let the audience know that if you have any questions, just feel free to put your hand up and someone will come over to you with a microphone.
Just before we go on, I just want to say, given the nature of the event and the people in the audience, I would really, really like the first question to be from a woman. Go.
We've got a question. Yep.
I just wondered if there are other countries, that you've looked at their media to see if it is a lot fairer than what you're seeing perhaps in the typically Western media or in Australian media? Other cultures is what I'm saying.
Because I'm an ignorant Australian, I only speak English, so I've only been able to look at the English-speaking papers. Certainly in the Western world, if anything, some of the UK tabloid press are revolting. I think they're worse than the Australian media. So I've looked at the English-speaking countries, but no, because of my inability to speak other languages, I haven't been able to.
Thank you for a wonderful address. I wanted to ask about the consequences that you were talking about in terms of the Me Too campaign and the men who have come forward, who have been exposed recently as sexual abusers. You pointed out that not that many had been fired. Well, even less have been imprisoned or held to account in any real way.
Absolutely.
I mean, you lost your job like Crimea River, frankly. You've ruined women's lives. And so that kind of push for accountability obviously ties in with the work that you're doing, but in terms of fighting for real consequences, where are we as, I guess, a group of people in society who are constantly having to deal with this and are constantly being told implicitly by the legal system that crimes against us are not as important as other crimes?
I think that's a really good question, and I think that one to me is even broader than just gender. That's about power structures. So the power structures at the moment are mostly in the hands of rich white men. So everybody who's not a rich white man, which is, let's face it, most of us, doesn't have the opportunity to get redress. So that's why the Black Lives Matter campaign started, that's why the Me Too campaign started, that's why the marriage equality campaign was such a big deal. These are all the groups that don't have power. I think it's encouraging that all those campaigns were able to happen and were able to push for change, and it happens, as I said, achingly slowly, but very, very slowly it is happening, and people of colour are very, very slowly taking places in those power structures. It's not enough, not nearly enough, not quick enough, but it is starting to happen, and I would like to believe that by the time my grandchildren are at work, this won't be an issue. I would like to hope that.
Hi, Jane. I missed the start, so I hope you didn't already address this, but how can we as everyday individuals who read the media and see articles, what can we do to present our view to the papers on how they're doing it wrong?
I think, good question. And this again is where I was talking about that news used to be a one-way communication. Wide broadcast from a very narrow start to a wide end, and nothing coming back the other way. If you wanted to make a complaint in the past, you would have to write a letter, put a stamp on it, take it down to the post office and wait 3 weeks for it maybe to appear in the paper, but probably not. Now it's so easy. You can do it on your phone on a tram stop. It's just getting on social media, tagging the publication, tagging the reporter, tagging the editor and saying, hey, this is not okay. I don't like it. It's wrong. Do you understand why it's wrong? And it's amazing, as I said, with these, once you start, how many people come along and go, yes. You might be the first one, but you're not going to be the only one. And again, they have to listen because they can't afford not to.
I think we've got a question down at the front, yep.
Hi. So while the headlines are really confronting and disturbing, I absolutely agree. What I find even more confronting as a woman who occasionally is mentioned in articles or has written articles, even in academic publications or somewhat academic publications like The Conversation, is the comments. I don't know whether you've noticed that if you write an article which anyway references women. I know, but I can't stop myself. But it's every single comment about an article about gender is written by men, and it's noxious. And as a woman, it's horrifying if you are one of the co-authors. And I've been guilty of sitting quietly by, letting my male co-author answer all those noxious comments.
That's a real problem. It's a real problem for women, as Santilla would also know, when you're a journalist, that the attacks that you get are not about your work. I know a lot of male journalists, and social media is there for people to yell at you. So the male journalists, they'll get people yelling at them, but they're yelling at them about the work that they've done. Women, they're yelling at us about the people who we are. And it can get exhausting and difficult. And in the comments section, the dregs of the internet, honestly, I don't read them anymore, but it still happens on social media, as you say. You still get them coming in. I think it's a real problem because it silences people, because those attacks against people without power are personal. And I think what we all saw with Yasmin was the absolute epitome of that. She's black, she's a Muslim, she's a woman, and she's young. And she's opinionated, and she's strong, and she's intelligent. And she's everything a woman's not allowed to be. And she was hounded out of the country for it. So I don't know what the answer is, because the change can't come from technology. I think the change has got to come socially. It's got to eventually get to the point where a woman like Yasmin can just say things and people go, oh yeah, okay. Or I disagree with her, or I don't really like what she said, or I'm not going to pay attention to it, but I'm not going to have that visceral rage fueled by racism and fear. And I think that's really the only way that that's going to change.
I just wanted to ask, when they put in articles sexual abuse, what does that really mean? That they were constantly raped, or...?
I don't want to get too specific on that, but there's a couple of definitions there. So some of it, if you're talking about court proceedings, there's definitions under the law, and disturbingly, in some states, in the Crimes Act, it is actually described as a sexual relationship with a child. So that gets complicated. Sexual abuse can have a range of meanings, depending on the state that you're in, depending on the charges that are laid and the age of the victim. Basically, I think you could assume it means anything where some kind of activity is happening against somebody's will, when they don't have the ability to consent, where power is being used to manipulate them in some way, whether physically or emotionally, into doing something that they either don't want to do or don't know how to say no to. And I don't think there's levels of sexual abuse. It's not like there's rape and bad rape, there's just rape.
Speaking about the language around sexual abuse and sexual harassment, what's been very interesting following the coverage of the Me Too campaign is the defensiveness by which some men have come forward when women have described the fact that, you know, someone decided to walk around naked and that is seen as harassment, and, you know, some men just can't seem to wrap their heads around that that is a violation. I mean, there's a part of me that sort of just gets frustrated with how slow it is to dismantle the patriarchy, because, you know, getting the fact that there are people that still cannot understand that there's a problem with that is an actual issue.
I think it's really difficult to see something you've never experienced. That I'm aware that racism exists, but I've never been subjected to it, so I don't always see it when it happens. If somebody points it out to me, I'll go, oh, yes, okay, I'll see it, but I don't have the visceral reaction to it that I would have to sexist things, because I know that and I have personal experience of that. So I can kind of understand that for men who might see it and understand it, but never actually been subjected to it, that it's difficult for them to understand what it's like to have that constantly. That it never ever ends. You know, what I said about sitting on the tram and the 70 images, that constant assault is difficult to understand when you've never experienced it. So, and I can also understand, again, while I find it incredibly frustrating, that defensiveness of the men that go, but you're talking about men like you're talking about me, and I don't do that. Because it's a horrible thing to think that people, what, you think I'm a rapist? You know, it's that traditional defence to, I'm more angry about the accusation of racism than that racism exists. It's a defensiveness, and I kind of understand it, but I also think, well, get over it, because you're not the one that's having the problem. I swing back and forth on this one. Sometimes I will take the time and have the patience to try and explain that the not all men argument is bullshit, and listen to what women are saying because they're talking about an experience you don't have. And sometimes I just roll my eyes so far back that I can see my own brain and go and have a drink. You know.
But surely there has to come a point, whether or not someone can understand that or has never experienced it, that empathy steps in, where you kind of go, you talked about power and power structures, and part of the reason why these issues keep coming up, sexism, racism, is because of those power structures. In that situation, one individual is asserting their power over another. So surely within that moment, they must know that what they're doing is not right, yet they still feel like they should be able to get away with it. And because they didn't rape someone or grope them or whatever it is, then that's okay.
Well, personally, I think we should just all go out and tear down all the power structures and that'll solve the problem. But if we're not going to do that, I think with part of that is trying to say, well, would you do that to somebody who had power over you? So the guy that makes some joke in the office to a woman who's working for him and just says, oh, it's just a joke, what are you being so sensitive about? And if you say to him, well, would you do that to a woman who was your boss? Would you say the same thing in the same way? Because if you would, either you're just a complete pig or then it's probably okay. But if you're doing it because there's a difference in the power levels here, then that's a problem. But again, that empathy that you're talking about requires understanding that this is not just one joke, that this is a lifetime of jokes. And why are you being so sensitive? And why are you being the fun police? And why are you ruining such a good time? And why can't you just be one of the guys? That constant battering of sexism means that it's not ever just one joke. So the empathy that you're talking about is required. But that's again where we go back to what I was talking about of so many men are told that empathy isn't masculine. If you're empathetic and understanding and compassionate, you're not a real man. Real men are stoic and tough and I'll just go and beat the shit out of him, but I'm not actually going to sit here and understand you. So I think men are naturally empathetic, but they're trained not to be or trained not to respond that way, which is a tragedy for men as much as it is for women. But it means that it's very difficult for them to go against that training and just sit and listen to somebody and try and understand it. Whereas women are almost, I think, too much told that's what we do. We look after and we nurture and we care and we comfort and we understand. And this dichotomy means that there's no room for middle ground, and I think there is, because humans are weird and complicated and all of us have a big mix of different things, and I think it should be a lot more smeared out across those things, and empathy is one of those really female characteristics that is effeminate and therefore wrong in men.
Do we have any more questions?
Yeah. Hi, Jane.
Hi.
I'm a huge fan.
Thank you.
I must say, every time your red pen work comes up in my feed, I'm overjoyed and horrified in equal measures. I just a couple of things I wanted to ask you quickly. One was, are you being invited to talk to young journalists, if they do indeed train young journalists anymore?
No.
What about work opportunities for you? Do you feel you're getting less because you're calling this stuff out? I know you've made it a bit of a mission. And lastly, just can you tell us a bit about, I think, is it your Patreon account where we can help support your work? Because it's pretty amazing, and I thank you so much for doing it.
Oh, thank you very much. I think it's very unlikely I'm going to get a job at News Limited anytime soon. So I don't know really if my work opportunities are limited by that. In some ways I get other work opportunities because of what I do. So it's a thing that I've talked to journalists, to freelancers about before, that if you have an area of specialty, it's something that you know a lot about, that you spend a lot of time on, that can give rise to work. And so I think as much as some things disappear, you know, some doors close, other doors open. I am really okay with that. That's if the price that I pay for doing this work means that I get to sit on stage with Santilla and talk about feminism and I can't write for the News Limited companies, then I'm okay with that. However, I also do have to pay rent and my kids get really cross when I don't feed them. So, and I get really cross when I can't go to the pub. So I did set up a Patreon account because the journalism work that I do, I won't do without being paid, but the Fixed It, I don't get paid for. And after a lot of nagging, I finally agreed to set up a Patreon account. It felt wrong to ask for money for it, but it does take a lot of time, and honestly, it takes a lot of emotional energy too, that I get up in the morning, I make a coffee, and I sit down with my laptop and I go through the Google alerts. And there are some days when I don't, because I just can't. I look at it and think, no, I just can't today. I can't take it. And there are other days when I'll just go and go and go and get more and more angry and just keep going. Here we go. Let's not stop. We're going. It's certainly not something I would never put them behind a paywall. I would never insist that people have to pay for it by any means. But I really do appreciate the people that do pay me for it, because it means that I can take the time to do it. Otherwise, I'm caught up in, oh God, rent's due and I haven't got it. What am I going to do? Who can I get to pay me to do something? So time is very limited.
One of the things that I often think about is taking a red pen to the right-wing press or whatever who do the thing, political correctness gone mad, and how we can respond to that statement about you're being too politically correct, or this is political correctness that's just gone off the radar.
Am I allowed to use that kind of language on stage? How I would respond to it? I think you can take a guess. I don't care that your ability to be racist or homophobic or sexist is causing you a problem. Go away, is my response to that. I don't care. I'm not. It's just rubbish. I think some of the people like Tim Blair and Mark Latham they seem to think they're representing a loud, a silent, huge, unheard majority, and I think we've seen pretty clearly that that's not true. Mark Latham's last YouTube video, I believe, got about 600 views. That's a pretty tiny minority. We've got 26 million people. So I don't care what they say. I don't pay any attention to it. I don't think many people do. If they were starting to get some traction, if they were really starting to have an impact on public policy, maybe I'd pay more attention to it, but they're not. They're old man shouts at clouds. You know?
Do we have any more questions? I have a question around something that came up this week. Mm-hmm. We briefly touched on it in the green room, and that is, as feminists, we start from the premise that, we should believe women when they come forward with allegations of sexual abuse or sexual assault. And Lena Dunham this week sort of had an incident, to put it lightly, where she, for those that are not familiar, Lena Dunham is, I suppose, a prominent feminist, a celebrity, and she, an actress on her TV show Girls, accused one of the writers of having sexually assaulted her many years ago when she was 17. And this woman came forward and filed these charges, and Lena Dunham put out a statement where she said, well, I've known this guy for a long time, he's a friend of mine, and I think in this instance, she's one of those 3% that are just not to be believed. And clearly, the internet was not having it, and she's come under attack for those comments. I mean, what do you think about that hypocrisy of, on the one hand, as a feminist, Lena Dunham argues that women should be believed, but when it comes to a friend of hers, someone that she knows and cares about, being in that position, very quick to sort of take a step back?
I think that's a real case of, you've got to walk the walk. That it's easy to sit around and talk about the monsters out there, they're all monsters, but when it's a friend of yours, the stuff that we talk about all the time, that men who rape women and attack women, they're not monsters. They don't walk around with big horns and a tail carrying a pitchfork. They look like they are the guy that you work with, and the guy you sit next to on the tram, and the guy at your family dinner, and the guy at your pub. They are the men that do this. And if you're not prepared to say, well, my principles say I believe women because I know that even that 3% of people that make up that, even that's bullshit, but I know that women don't make these claims up lightly or easily. So I will believe her because I would rather believe her and be wrong than not believe her and be wrong. And particularly to do it publicly, and particularly because the woman involved was a woman of colour. And then you've got that intersection of all the terrible things going on there, of what that must have done to her to have Lena Dunham come out and tell the world that she's a liar. I mean, at the very least, say nothing. But I would say, if it's a friend of mine, well, no, I believe women. And I'd rather believe her and be wrong than not believe her and be wrong. Because you'll be okay either way, dude, seriously. You're not going to have any consequences.
I think we had a question. Yep.
Does the personal abuse that you get on social media contribute to the days that you just can't deal with it?
No. Short answer to that. For some reason, and I'm honestly not sure what it is, it doesn't particularly bother me. Occasionally it makes me laugh. The guy that told me I was nothing but a communist in panties is still one of my favourite ever. And if I could carry a tune in anything other than a bucket, I would start a band just so I could call it that. But no, it doesn't. When they tell me that I'm fat and I'm a slut and I shouldn't have a job and I shouldn't be allowed to write because I'm too fat to write, and I just think, what? How am I supposed to take you seriously? So sometimes if I'm bored, I'll play. There was one of my fun times, I think I was at a bar, I was waiting for a friend and she was running late, so I was there with my phone and a glass of wine. And some guy started on me and I just kept going back to me like he was asking me out on a date, and he was just raging at me, and I was going, oh, look, dude, I'm really sorry, but I'm just not feeling it. I'm really sorry. And then his mate came in, I'm going, he's right here, he can see you, come on, have some sensitivity. And he was losing his mind. And it was just funny, but the rest of the time, if I'm busy, I just ignore it because I refuse to give them my time or my energy. The things that I find distressing that will actually pull me up is this stuff, is seeing this and having to read through all the articles and check what are the facts of this and go back and have a look at other articles and chase up court transcripts and talk to lawyers and say what really happened and what was actually reported. Going into court sometimes and listening to it, those kind of things are exhausting and draining. But and this is, by the way, not true of everybody. I know that there are some women that really do find it incredibly distressing, and I completely understand that. And as I said, I'm really not sure why I don't. I just don't.
How do you take care of yourself emotionally when you're having to repeatedly sort of...
I don't say this because I recommend it, but usually I drink too much.
Yeah.
Other than that, it's knowing when to take time out. So just, as I said, there are some days when I'll just say, no, not today. I can't. I'm going to lie in bed and read a book about dragons instead.
We probably have time for one final question. Yep.
Hi, I don't want to end on a downer, but I'm 68 and I've worked in a lot of different places. And effectively, you were saying there were 52% of women in journalism who've never been harassed or bothered or assaulted, and I find that hard to believe because I've been going back over all my workplaces, and there are one or two where I think I never had problems, but really they're the minority. Mm-hmm. And the problem I have with putting all this together is that my experiences have ranged from mild harassment to major assault. And if you put them all in the same bag, you'd have half the population banged up in jail or clogging up the courts. And, you know, that's not going to happen. And somehow we have to differentiate between what you could call a bloke who needs education and a bloke who needs to go to court and needs to be punished for what they've done. And there's a danger of slippage from the one to the other. And I wanted to say a related point, which is the false allegation thing. I think every allegation has to be taken seriously. I think there are some allegations that are incorrect, but which the person concerned really believes, and there are reasons for that to do with trauma. There are some allegations where you've got conflict, where it's a weapon. I have no idea of the percentage, but I didn't follow the Lena Dunham thing, but how can you say you believe a particular allegation when you have no knowledge of it? You have to take it seriously. You can't dismiss it the way she did, but you can't say you believe it. So I'm making 2 points. One is that sexual harassment and assault is extremely common. It's all over the landscape, not just in journalism. But on the other hand, an allegation is an allegation, and you have to stand back and see what the evidence is before you jump to conclusions.
Okay, well, very quickly, because we are running out of time, I absolutely agree with you that it is everywhere, and I suspect that the 48% is severely underestimated as well. I think there are things in place so that there is a difference between sexual harassment and rape. There's a difference under the law, there's a difference in the way that it's managed or not managed in the workplace, but there are certainly differences in definitions in the way it's treated legally and in the punishments that are due for it. As far as believing women, I disagree with you. I think I can believe women who claim that they've been assaulted, but there is a difference between saying, I believe you, and I know that what she said is true. So I can say, and I will say, I believe you if you just tell me this. I will believe you. But I will not then go and say to everybody else, I know that this is true. I have factual evidence that this is true. If it's going towards the court, then the presumption of innocence is important, definitely. There is a difference between saying, I believe you, and I know that this is true. And I will always believe you.
And on that note, I think that's a wrap for tonight's event. Thank you everyone for coming out, and a very big thank you to Jane for that wonderful lecture and your insights.
Thank you. And thank you all for coming.
Visit wheelercentre.com for the best in books, writing and ideas from Melbourne, Australia and the world.